throughout these series of emergencies, we have all benefited greatly from the tutoring of our Professor Seyed Marandi, Professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. And boy, do we need him to explain what's happening now. Professor, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. I want to tour the horizon with you, but if I can start with Lebanon, a country which matters a lot to both of us, I know. What do you think are the consequences of the Lebanese government's decision to proceed with the American-Israeli order to disarm the Lebanese resistance?
Well, George, thank you very much for inviting me. I couldn't hear the first part of the question, so I'll respond, and if there's anything left out, please let me know and I'll explain further. I think all of this is both good and bad. Over the past few months, everyone has been exposed in this region. Over the last 2 years, everyone has been exposed, but over the last few months in particular. In Syria, oil and gas-rich dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, whose overlords are in Washington, they've been using sectarianism. They've blinded so many people and clouded the truth through sectarianism and religious and racial hatred towards the reality in Syria. Now that Al-Qaeda and Daesh or ISIS and Al-Qaeda have come to power and they've been slaughtering people, the mask has been removed. The mask of the regimes in Doha, but also those in Turkey, the Erdogan government who've been supporting them, their masks have been removed. They've been done nothing to support the Syrian people. The country is falling apart. These extremists are murdering not just the Alawites, not just the Druze, not just the Christians, but moderate Sunnis. They're being exposed. In Lebanon, too, we see the same forces who've always been targeting Hezbollah, which has made huge sacrifices for the people of Gaza. Alongside Ansarullah in Yemen, they've made the biggest sacrifices. In fact, I'd say that Hezbollah made the biggest sacrifices because they are right next door to Palestine, and the Israeli regime carried out a huge slaughter against the people of Lebanon. And especially this was difficult for Hezbollah because it had so many internal enemies that are affiliated to the West. Now those groups that are affiliated to the West are all aligning themselves with one another, with the Israeli regime, and with Jolani in Damascus in order to destroy the resistance. So basically what we've seen is that NATO, through Erdogan, and these dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, they've been trying to demolish the Northern Resistance Front. Who benefits from this? Of course, the Israeli regime, because they are in cooperation. They're cooperating with the Israeli regime. Erdogan wants his mini Ottoman Empire in northern Syria, northern Lebanon, northern Iraq, and the Caucasus, and he will allow, or will be forced to allow, the Israeli regime to expand, the greater Israel to grow, and there will be points of friction, but there's no doubt that the Israeli regime will have the upper hand. And the countries in the Persian Gulf region, they're all aiding the Israeli regime as well, as we're seeing today in Lebanon. So in a sense, it's a good thing. All the masks have been removed. The European masks over the last 2 years have been removed through their support of the Holocaust. These regimes, their masks have been removed. But of course, the suffering of the Syrian people and the fears that we have for the people of Lebanon remain in place. But I am confident that the resistance in Lebanon will gain the upper hand. And I hope there's no strife, there's no military strife in Lebanon. But it is interesting that as the regime in Beirut, the pro-American regime in Beirut, is trying or threatening or deciding to disarm Hezbollah, the Israeli regime is murdering Hezbollah affiliates and citizens of Lebanon on a daily basis.
Well, I lived in Beirut in 1977, and there had just been a civil war. And that was a civil war of a much smaller scale than would happen today, because then, if you'll forgive me saying so, I was completely unaware that there were any Shia people in Lebanon in 1977. They were not at all a political factor. This was a civil war between the pro-Israeli Christian fascist militias and the Arab nationalists and their Palestinian PLO allies. And it was a civil war of great devastation. But the forces involved in it were more limited than the forces that would be involved in a civil war in Lebanon now. So I'm praying that it doesn't come to that, because I don't see how Lebanon could survive that. Now, I know the capabilities of the Lebanese resistance. I also know, and I don't want to be overly disrespectful, the capabilities of the Lebanese armed forces. They're clearly a mismatch, as has been demonstrated before. So if they're going to try and take the weapons from the resistance, it ain't going to be the conscripts of the Lebanese army that does it. It will have to be foreign forces, international forces. Do you think we're really looking down the barrel of that gun?
Well, first of all, we have to keep in mind that the resistance in Lebanon has popular support, and it goes beyond, far beyond the Shia community. The Palestinians, huge segment of the Palestinian population in Lebanon, support the resistance. They know that the only people who sacrificed their lives and the lives of their families and their friends and neighbors, they come from this resistance, from Hezbollah. And in the local elections that we saw after the genocidal war that the Israeli regime carried out, we saw that the resistance won everywhere where it participated. So they have popular support across Lebanon. They have the majority. Of course, the Americans are supporting their militias, their fascist allies like the Lebanese forces, among others. And of course, there's Jolani. Remember, Jolani has been sending messages to the Israeli regime regularly saying, we have the same enemies. Our only two enemies are Iran and Hezbollah. But again, this is exposing the reality in this region to people across the world and to the Muslims across the world who were very much influenced by propaganda from oil and gas-rich dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, whether it's Qatar or Saudi Arabia or the Emirates. Now that masks are removed, and I do not think that they will succeed. The conscript army that you speak of, many of them, most of them, they are supporters of the resistance. They come from those communities that support the resistance, among both Muslims and Christians and Druze. So the regime in Beirut is not going to win. They will be defeated if they go down the road of civil war. But they're in the pockets of the United States. They do as they're told. At least that's what they've been doing so far. And there's no doubt that Iran will support Hezbollah. And there are many ways in which Iran can do that. And if Jolani interferes on behalf of the Israeli regime and others to help fight against Hezbollah, he will be in serious trouble, because Iraq will not accept that, Iran will not accept that, the resistance will not accept that, and Hezbollah, as you rightly pointed out, it is the most powerful force in Lebanon by far, and it is much stronger and more competent than Jolani. The only thing that could possibly happen would be for the Israeli regime, along with Jolani and the regime in Beirut, for them to collaborate together against the resistance. But again, that's not something that Iran will allow to happen. And I think the 12-day war of aggression that the Israeli regime carried out against Iran and the punishment that it received, we should all recall what Steve Bannon said. He said that the real story, the unknown story of this war, is that Trump saved the Israeli regime and Netanyahu, because they were taking a big, bad beating during the last days of the war. The Israeli regime should be very careful about how it behaves, and so should Jolani, because Iran's capabilities today are far better than they were just a month ago.
Now, you mentioned Iran, of course, and let's turn to that. It seemed to me the most significant development over the last week or so is the Trump corridor, which he has negotiated. They'll probably build a Trump Tower on it between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Ancient foes, indeed. They were at war not even a 12-month ago. But hey presto, they've come together in Washington, and Trump has got himself a new piece of territory that he's going to be responsible for. Tell us what that's all about and what Iran's reaction to it is.
Well, first I'd like to give a very brief history, and that is when Armenia launched an attack on the Republic of Azerbaijan decades ago. The Iranians condemned that. And in fact, the Iranians were training volunteers in the Republic of Azerbaijan so that they can retake back what was legitimately theirs. And then the Americans ordered Aliyev, the current president, to expel the Iranians. So the liberation of his own territory was delayed for 3 decades because he obeyed the United States. And I've shown footage on Twitter of Iranians training these Azeris. Now it's the other way around. With the support of the Israeli regime and Erdogan, the Republic of Azerbaijan attacked Armenia. They liberated territory that was theirs in accordance with international law. Of course, they ethnically cleansed the Armenians, which is a huge violation and a crime against humanity. But they took back their territory. But the Iranians have said that if Aliyev tries to take Armenia, it will mean war. And the Iranians have put lots of troops on the border to send that message. So what the Iranians from the beginning were supporting was the territorial integrity of both the Republic of Azerbaijan and the Republic of Armenia. Now what the United States is doing is it's trying to build a corridor. That's what the Azerbaijan, the Aliyev and Baku and Erdogan have been trying to do for a long time, to cut off the link between Iran and Armenia. Iran has said about this, both when Erdogan and Aliyev were attempting this, and now that Trump has been trying to do this, that if there is a land bridge between the two parts of the Republic of Azerbaijan that does not impede Iran's access to Armenia and through Armenia to Georgia and Russia and the Black Sea, Iran has no problem with that. That is a sovereign decision to make by the Armenian government. They can do whatever, they can have a transport corridor between the two sides, just like Iraq can have that, Pakistan can have that, anyone else can do the same. But if there is an agreement where the Armenian government no longer has authority over its territory, and there is a possibility that Iran's access is impeded by any means, that will not be tolerated in Tehran. George, they will not tolerate that. Even if it has to, even if the country has to go to war, they will not tolerate that. So that area of Armenia has to remain under the authority of the government of Armenia. There cannot be foreign troops there, and no one will be allowed to impede Iran's access to Armenia in any way or form, whether it's Aliyev's forces or it's Trump's mercenaries or contractors, it doesn't matter. Iran's access through this border must remain unimpeded, just like any other border. Iran's relationship with Armenia must be just like its relationship with Azerbaijan and Iraq and Turkey, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and so on.
I mean, plainly, Iran has vital national interests at stake in this. But it's hard to avoid the conclusion that this is as much aimed against Russia as it is aimed against Iran. Just as the Ukraine might be coming off the boil, they want to create a stew in the south, in the Caucasus, in the near abroad of Russia. Is that how you read it?
There's no doubt that that is what they want. And George, I'm not in the Iranian government, so I can speak openly. Erdogan, instead of supporting the Palestinian people, he's been helping the Israeli regime during this whole period. And he's been trying to undermine the resistance and Iran and the axis of resistance during the last 2 years, in particular, in alignment with the Israeli regime. His ally in Baku, the dictator Aliyev, is an ally of Netanyahu. His ally in Syria tells Netanyahu, this Al-Qaeda and ISIS thug, Ashara or Jolani, has been telling the Israelis that our enemies are only Iran and Hezbollah. So instead of helping the people of Gaza, he's been doing nothing but harm to the axis of resistance. And the same is true with these oil and gas-rich dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, especially Qatar, which it pretends through its TV to have sympathy for the Palestinian people, but in reality it gives its territory to the United States to use against Iran, against Yemen, and against whoever is opposed to the United States and the Israeli regime. In fact, Tucker Carlson just recently in one of his shows said that the American base in Qatar is there. Everyone knows that it is there to protect the Israeli regime. It's not there to protect Qatar. It's there to protect the Israeli regime. So all the masks have been removed. And there's no doubt that Erdogan is in alliance with the United States, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. They're all allies of the United States. They're not going to do anything that opposes key U.S. foreign policy, key U.S. foreign policy agenda. And without a doubt, in the Caucasus, the objective of NATO is to break the link between Russia and Iran, to encircle Russia and also to isolate Iran. But that's not going to happen. There's no way in the world that Iran will allow that to happen. Iran will make sure that Armenia's sovereignty is preserved, and it will also make sure, just as in the past, Iran was the first country to support Azeri, the sovereignty of the Republic of Azerbaijan, before Aliyev expelled them under orders coming from the White House. And it is quite interesting, George, that the United States and the West is willing to sacrifice Christians across West Asia. And it is Iran and Hezbollah and the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces that protect the Christians, whether it was in Iraq, whether it was in Syria or Lebanon or Armenia or anywhere else. They were the ones who caused the destruction of Christian communities, the West and their allies, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, supported by the West and their allies. And it was these forces from the axis of resistance that protected the Christians across the region. And you visited the Christian and Jewish community in Iran. Iran is the country in the region which has Christian MPs in parliament and a Jewish MP in parliament. None of these allies of the United States have any of those things.
Or even a parliament in many cases. You mentioned the United States. Let me ask you, with your former hat as professor of American studies, Alaska is an interesting choice for the big summit that's coming up on the 15th. You can measure the possibility of success in the talks by the length of Zelensky's face and the panic amongst his acolytes in the European Union government. What's your anticipation from this summit? Might we be in the last days of this war?
it's not impossible, but I remain somewhat skeptical because Trump promised to end this war before he came to power. And he said he'll finish it in one day, as we all remember. And it's been 6 months, over 6 months now. And the slaughter has only continued and it has really intensified. And so I think Trump is a weak leader. And I think that he knows that he has to end the war because, especially now that the Ukrainian army is collapsing on all fronts, things are falling apart. And I think the real incentive for him to bring a halt to this war is not because he has, well, he definitely has no humanitarian concerns because he's carrying out a Holocaust in Gaza, but he sees that everything is falling apart. However, the forces against an end to the war, not the Europeans, they're not important, they count for nothing, but the deep state and the neocons, they still want this war. And I'm not sure if he is going to be able to, if he really wants to end the war, to do so under the sort of pressure that we're seeing from the neocons. And we're seeing how they're already depicting this as a potential capitulation and defeat for the United States. They're making it more difficult for the war to end. And of course, they're making money, they're making their billions. That's what this was all about. What surprises me what doesn't surprise me is what these neocons are seeking, because they are selfish and inhumane people. What surprises me is the degree to which the Europeans are hell-bent on destroying Europe. They destroyed their relationship with Russia. They created an energy crisis. At the time when the war began, they had an opportunity to have a nuclear deal with Iran. Winter was approaching, and the winter of Europe continues today. If they had that deal with Iran, they could have invested in oil and gas and at least made that energy crisis that they're confronting today less painful. But no, they had to wreck their relationship with Russia and Iran, and now they've capitulated to the United States, and they're going to buy their natural gas from there at a huge inflated price. But at the same time, they're insisting, these corrupt elites, on continuing the war with Russia. That's what surprises me, the degree to which these European leaders have no regard whatsoever for their own people, and of course, for the poor soldiers in Ukraine who are being slaughtered every day.